Zara Amara was the kind of woman people remembered, even when they tried not to. She was not the loudest person in a room. She was not the most decorated, nor the most traditionally dressed. She was simply present in a way that made others feel slightly exposed, as though she could see past the surface of things and read what was really going on underneath. People found this uncomfortable. Especially the people who had something to hide. She grew up in a tight community of South Asian families who had come to the United Kingdom decades ago and brought their old world with them, carefully packed between their luggage and their prayers. They were good people in many ways, generous with food, fierce in loyalty, strong in faith. But they carried something else too, something older and harder, a belief that a woman's greatest virtue was knowing her place and staying quietly inside it. Zara did not know her place. Or perhaps, more accurately, she knew exactly where her place was, and it simply was not where they wanted her to be. As a child, she asked questions that made the elders shift in their seats. As a teenager, she read books that no one had assigned her. As a young woman, she spoke in full sentences at gatherings where women were expected to serve the food and then disappear into the kitchen. None of this was done with anger or rebellion. She was simply being herself. But being yourself, when yourself is too strong for the room, is its own kind of offense. The summer she turned 26, her cousin Horace got married in a rented hall on the edge of the city. The hall was packed with relatives from 3 different cities, all dressed in bright colors, all talking over each other, all watching everyone else. The wedding was beautiful in the chaotic, noisy way that weddings in that community always were, full of children running between tables, aunts arguing over the seating arrangements, and uncles standing in corners debating things they did not fully understand. Zara sat near the women's section. She was smiling, eating, not bothering anyone. Her dress was modest. Her hair was neat. She had done everything correctly that evening. But correctness was never really the point. Her Aunt Nazreen leaned across the table. Nazreen was a woman who had appointed herself the community's moral record keeper, always watching, always measuring, always finding someone who had fallen slightly short. She leaned close enough for the 2 women beside her to hear clearly, and she said, with the satisfied tone of someone delivering a well-researched conclusion, "She will never find a good husband." There is too much opinion in her eyes. The women around them made quiet sounds of agreement, the kind of sounds people make when they want to seem thoughtful without taking any real position. Zara picked up her chai and took a long, slow sip. She kept her face completely still. She had been practicing that stillness for years, the art of not letting people see that their words had landed. But they had landed. They always did. 2 years later, Zara was accepted into a paralegal training program at a respected law firm in the city center. She was the first woman in her family to enter a professional field outside of teaching or medicine, and she knew it. She told her mother on a quiet Tuesday evening, choosing the moment carefully, hoping for warmth. Her mother sat with the news for a long time. Then she said, in a voice that was more worried than proud, "What will people say? You will be working with men you do not know. You will be coming home late. Do you want them to talk about us?" Her father said nothing at dinner that night. He moved food around his plate and occasionally looked at the wall. Her 2 brothers exchanged glances across the table, the quick, sideways kind that said everything without saying a word. The silence in that house was its own language, and the message it delivered that evening was clear: she had stepped outside the boundary, and now everyone would have to carry the embarrassment of it. She took the job anyway. And within a month, her name had become a quiet warning passed between families in the community. Mothers told their daughters about Zara, not as an example to follow, but as a path to avoid. "Don't be like Zara," they would say, as though ambition were a disease you could catch if you weren't careful. The proposals began when she was 27 and continued with grim regularity for the next several years. Families would arrive on a Saturday afternoon, sit in the good living room on the good furniture, drink tea from the good cups that were only brought out for special occasions, and look at Zara with the careful, calculating eyes of people who were shopping for something very specific. She would sit straight. She would smile. She would answer their questions with honesty and warmth. And then, within a few days, the answer would come back through her mother, delivered with a mixture of apology and frustration. The family had decided to continue their search elsewhere. The reasons were never short of words. "She is too direct. She has opinions about things that do not concern her. She works outside the home, this will create problems. We are looking for someone who is a little more settled. One family, notable for their bluntness, said simply, we need a simpler girl. 17 proposals. 17 times she sat in that chair. 17 times the answer came back in the wrong direction. The community watched all of this with great interest. For some, it was satisfying in a way they would never say out loud, proof that a woman who had refused to be ordinary would end up paying a price for it. Invitations to gatherings became less frequent. Friends she had known since childhood began creating distance, not out of cruelty exactly, but out of the quiet self-preservation of people who worried that standing too close to someone labeled a failure might transfer some of that label onto themselves. Zara kept going to work. She kept reading. She kept building the quiet, solid life she was constructing for herself, brick by careful brick. But she was not made of stone, and the weight of all that rejection, added together, accumulated into something heavy and hard to carry. The year she turned 33 was the hardest. By then, the whispers had become statements. At a family gathering that autumn, her uncle, a man who had never worked a day with any real difficulty in his life, looked at her across the table in front of 12 relatives and said, plainly and without embarrassment, you chose your path. Now live with it alone. She drove home that night with the radio off. She sat in her parked car outside her flat for 20 minutes before going inside. And for the first time in her adult life, she began to wonder if they were right. Not about everything, but about enough. She started editing herself. Small changes at first, speaking a little less directly in meetings, removing her more impressive achievements from casual conversations, laughing at things she did not find funny so that she seemed less serious, less threatening. She wore less color. She took up less space. She tried, with real effort, to become the version of herself that the world around her seemed to be asking for. It did not work. The smaller she made herself, the more uncomfortable she felt in her own skin. And the mocking did not stop, because the mocking had never really been about her behavior. It had been about her existence, the simple, unacceptable fact that she was strong and she had refused to hide it. Something in her began to resist. Quietly, without announcement, without even fully understanding what it was doing, some deep part of her stopped accepting the story that other people were writing about her life. It did not happen in a single moment. It was more like water slowly finding its way through a crack in a wall, patient, persistent, and ultimately unstoppable. On a Wednesday morning in March, Zara stood at a bus stop in the rain. She was 34 years old, tired from a late meeting the night before, and scrolling through her phone with the automatic, half-present energy of someone who has learned to fill empty moments with noise so that they do not have to feel too much. The street was mostly quiet. A car passed. A dog on a lead pulled his owner toward a lamp post. The rain was light but persistent, the kind that gets into the collar of your coat without you noticing until you are already cold. An elderly man stood a few steps away from her. He was English, perhaps in his mid-70s, wearing a tweed cap and a gray coat, leaning slightly on a wooden walking stick. He had been at the bus stop when she arrived. She had noticed him the way you notice furniture, aware of it, but not paying real attention. She did not know that he had been watching her. Not in an odd way. In the way someone watches something that interests them, quietly, without wanting anything from it, simply observing. When the bus appeared around the bend in the road, the man turned toward her. His eyes were calm and very clear, the kind of eyes that have seen enough of life to stop being surprised by most of it. He spoke without hesitation, in the measured voice of someone saying something he had decided was worth saying. You are exactly what the world needs. 6 words. He said nothing else. He stepped onto the bus. The doors closed. The bus moved away down the wet road and disappeared around the corner. Zara did not move. She stood at that bus stop while the rain continued to fall on her coat, her hair, her face. The next bus came and she let it go. She stood there for several minutes, completely still, as though she had forgotten that moving was something she knew how to do. 6 words from a man she had never seen before and would never see again. A man with no connection to her family, no membership in her community, no reason in the world to notice her or say anything at all. He had simply looked at her, at exactly who she was, without any of the history or the labels or the reputation that followed her everywhere else, and in 30 seconds, he had spoken a truth that 7 years of mocking had tried to bury. She walked back to the office that morning in the rain without an umbrella. She did not notice that she was wet. Something changed after that morning. Not dramatically, not all at once, but steadily, in the way a season changes, so gradually you almost miss it until one day you look up and realize the trees are a completely different color. She applied for a senior associate position at the firm. Her manager, a practical woman named Claire who had been quietly watching Zara work for 3 years, called her into her office and said without ceremony, "I have been waiting for you to do this." Zara got the position. She stopped attending gatherings where the price of admission was performing smallness. She did not make a scene of it. She simply became unavailable on those evenings, and when people asked why, she said she had other plans, because she did. She had a life she was building, and building it required her time. She wrote an essay about identity and belonging and the particular loneliness of being strong in a place that has decided strength is a problem. She sent it to a small community newspaper, expecting nothing. They published it on the front page of their weekend edition. The editor called her personally to say they had received more letters about that piece than about anything they had printed in 3 years. Some of those letters were critical. She read them carefully and set them aside. Many more were from women, young women, older women, women she had never met, who wrote sentences like, "I thought I was the only one," and "I have never seen my life written down before," and simply, "Thank you." The community noticed, the way communities always notice when someone refuses to stay in the box that has been built for them. The response was not a warm embrace, that would have been too much to expect. But the tone shifted. The certainty went out of the mockery. It is very difficult to ridicule someone who has built something real and visible, because ridicule requires the other person to be smaller than you, and Zara was no longer smaller than anyone. Girls from the community began contacting her quietly, through messages and sometimes through mutual friends, asking for advice and guidance. These were the daughters of the women who had once warned their children away from her. They were young and they were confused and they were trying to understand how to live in 2 worlds at once, and they had decided, on their own, that Zara was someone worth asking. She answered every message. She gave her time generously and without keeping score. Her Aunt Nazreen, the woman from the wedding table, the woman who had inspected Zara's eyes and found too much opinion in them, called one afternoon under the thin pretense of sharing family news. She talked for 15 minutes about a cousin's new house and someone else's graduation. Then, in the last few seconds of the call, her voice dropped slightly, and she said, "You turned out well, Zara." She moved immediately to another subject, as though the words had slipped out and she was not entirely prepared to own them. It was the nearest thing to an apology the woman had ever offered another human being. Zara held it gently and did not make it into more than it was. Some things you accept quietly, without demanding that they be dressed up as something bigger. She met Omar in the spring of the following year, at a professional conference where they were both attending a panel on community advocacy. He was a physician with an easy manner and an honest face, and he introduced himself by disagreeing, politely but clearly, with something she had said during the Q&A session. She found this interesting. Most people who disagreed with her either said nothing, or they disagreed with unnecessary heat. He did neither. He made his point, listened to her response, and then said, "That is a better answer. I take back the disagreement." She laughed out loud, which surprised her. They spoke for 2 hours after the conference ended. She told him, without planning to, about the proposals and the rejections. She had never told anyone the full number before. He was quiet while she spoke. When she finished, he sat with it for a moment, and then he said, "Every single one of those families did you a favor." She asked him what he meant. He said, "They were not ready for someone like you. That is not a flaw in you. That is a limitation in them." It was not the most romantic thing anyone had ever said to her. But it was the most honest. And she had spent so many years surrounded by things that were performed rather than real that honesty, delivered simply and without decoration, felt like the most extraordinary gift. They were married in the early months of 2020. The wedding was small, a handful of people who mattered, a good meal, and no performance. No borrowed grandeur, no politics of seating arrangements, no measuring of worth by the size of the guest list. Just 2 people who had looked at each other clearly and decided, with full awareness of what they were doing, to choose each other. Zara returned to that bus stop many times over the years that followed. She looked for the men in the tweed cap. She looked carefully, on rainy mornings and dry ones, on weekdays and weekends. She never found him. She does not know his name. She does not know where he came from or where he was going that morning or whether he had any understanding of what those 6 words had done to her. She thinks about him often. She thinks about how strange it is that a person who knew nothing about her, none of the history, none of the labels, none of the weight that others had placed on her name, could see her so completely in 30 seconds. He did not see a problem to be fixed. He did not see a woman who had gotten too big for her designated space. He simply saw a person standing in the rain, and whatever he saw in her, he found it worth remarking on. Sometimes she wonders if he knew. If some part of him understood that she was someone who needed to hear exactly that, at exactly that moment. She will never know. That is the thing about strangers who change your life, they move on with no idea what they have left behind. Today, Zara works as a legal advocate. Part of her work involves supporting young women who are navigating the particular pressure of family expectation and community judgment, women who are being told that their ambition is a problem, that their strength makes them difficult, that they should be quieter and smaller and more convenient for the people around them. She does not give these young women a speech about self-belief. She does not put up motivational words on her office wall. She sits with them, and she listens, and she tells them the truth as plainly as she can. She tells them that the people who reject you for being strong are not misreading you. They are reading you exactly correctly, and that is what frightens them. A person who cannot be made smaller is a person who cannot be controlled. And a person who cannot be controlled makes certain kinds of people very nervous. She tells them that rejection, when it comes from fear, is not a verdict. It is information. It tells you something important about the person doing the rejecting, and absolutely nothing true about you. She tells them about the bus stop. She tells them about the rain and the old man and the 6 words. And she watches their faces change as the story settles in, the way her face must have changed that morning on the wet pavement, standing still while the world moved around her. She tells them, the right people will not need you to be less. They will simply want you to be exactly what you already are. And she tells them one more thing. She tells them that she spent years believing the problem was inside her, that if she could just adjust herself correctly, find the right angle, file down the edges that other people found uncomfortable, everything would finally fit. She tells them that this was the one thing she was genuinely wrong about, in all the years of her life. The problem was never inside her. It never is, for women like her. She was not too much. She was exactly enough. She just needed to outlast the people who had not yet figured that out. And she did.